Jean Harlow was the original blonde bombshell.
Would you be shocked if I put on something more comfortable?
Jean Harlow is the first actress from film that we see on the cover of Life magazine. She's become this icon of the blonde bombshell.
Jean Harlow is an icon. She created that look. She put blonde actresses on the map.
Entree. It means come in and French.
I don't spill my French till I'm leaving.
Jean Harlow initially found fame playing the vamp role, but over her career, she began to show the real depth of her talent.
She represented something that had never been shown on the screen before.
She wasn't just this vixen. She had comedic chops. She could really act. She was said to be very sweet in real life, and we were starting to see more of those sort of sweet roles coming up for her.
In a career that lasted just 10 years, Harlow forever left her mark on Hollywood.
He wouldn't approve of me either if he knew what I really liked.
Following her were a lot of other stars who tried to do the same, nothing like as successfully.
Jean Harlow was born March 3rd, 1911.
Jean Harlow was born Harleen Jean Carpenter. Her mother's name, in fact, her mother's unmarried name was Jean Harlow, which is where obviously she finally got it from.
She grew up in Kansas City. She had quite a well-to-do family. It wasn't a kind of the poor childhood story, but it wasn't a very happy parentage.
Her mother was a real estate heiress, and her father was a dentist, and they didn't really get along that well, this couple. So they separated when Harleen was quite young. And she always sort of sided with her mother. Her mother was obsessed with her daughter.
Her mother had always wanted to be an actress. And so I think clearly she had invested something into her daughter, which finally took flight.
From a young age, Harlow's mother would call her daughter the baby, a nickname that stuck for life. In 1923, Harlow's mother moved with her daughter to Hollywood in pursuit of her own ambitions to become an actress.
The mother decided at the age of roughly, I think, 34, it was about time she became an actress.
She desperately wanted to be an actress, but she was found to be too old to start out then. And so she poured all her affection onto Harleen, who didn't want to be an actress at all.
Harlow's mother struggled to find work in Hollywood, whilst back in Kansas City, her father had started legal proceedings to see his daughter again.
The money ran out, and Jean and Harleen were kind of forced back to Kansas City by Jean's father.
Her father, estranged father, had threatened to sort of cut off the family if he didn't get to see more of his daughter. The mother had been trying to block him seeing her, so they moved back.
At that stage, you can see a young lady, her teens, who had no interest in becoming an actress or stardom. She'd kind of seen it. She hadn't sort of particularly liked what she'd seen, and I think she'd felt very oppressed by her mother's desires, and a kind of different life beckoned.
Several weeks after returning to Kansas City, Harlow was sent to a summer camp in Michigan. Unfortunately, she became seriously ill with scarlet fever.
Her misfortunes really began at a summer camp she went to, and she got scarlet fever. Well, in those days, this was quite a serious condition. They didn't have the antibiotics to deal with it.
Her mother went to fetch her, and actually rowed across the lake, so legend has it, to retrieve her daughter, and wasn't allowed to see her.
She never really got over the scarlet fever.
Whatever happened to her at that time left an indelible physical mark on her, because I think that was the beginning of many of her physical problems.
She was never really a well person.
Following her illness, Harlow was moved by her mother once again, settling in Lake Forest, Illinois. She attended the Ferry Hall School, where Jean Harlow met 19-year-old Charles McGrew.
She was just 16 when she met 19-year-old Charles McGrew. and he sort of swept her off her feet. They were married almost immediately, and he was coming from a very wealthy family, and he had a large inheritance. So very quickly after they married, they moved to Los Angeles. They sort of bought this mansion and sat around and were socialites and drank a lot and just sort of lived the good life for a few years.
She was introduced, when she went back to LA, to all sorts of parties and became what she wanted to be, was a sort of a high-class girl.
The problem was that because Chuck McGrew was so rich that neither of them had to work. They lived an enjoyable life, but purposeless. They obviously both drank rather too much. And inevitably what happened was that the marriage just sort of foundered on the rocks.
It was a short-lived marriage. They only stayed married about 3 years.
In Los Angeles, Jean Harlow had become friends with aspiring actress Rosalie Roy. Harlow unexpectedly started her own screen career when she gave Roy a ride to the Fox studios and was spotted by executives.
Jean Harlow, still Harleen at that point, takes her friend, drives her to an audition, and I imagine didn't sort of stay in the car. You know, the story sort of goes that the executives discovered her in a car. I think she probably went in and waited and was in some kind of way available for executives to see. And by then, you know, she kind of matured into, to a certain extent, the kind of the blonde bombshell that was to come. So if you are a Fox executive walking past and she's sitting there in a waiting room waiting for her friend to finish auditioning, and you're going to go, well, who are you? You know, that's what their kind of job was. And they, you know, again, as the legend goes, said, well, why aren't you auditioning? And she said, I'm not interested. But as again, you know, legend and myth kind of blur with the facts a little bit, she did end up with a recommendation to join Central Casting.
And subsequently, her friend made a bet with her that she wouldn't have the brass neck to actually turn up at a casting. So rather than lose a wager, she did, and she was offered a contract.
Her mother was a big influence in her breaking into Hollywood. Her mother had had her own dreams of making it as a starlet. She saw the possibility of those dreams coming through her daughter. And at first, even after going to Central Casting, Jean Harlow wasn't really convinced she wanted to do this acting thing. And she turned down a couple of parts. But her mother was the one that kept pushing her to say, you're going to take that part. So it was really her mother who pushed her so hard to do it.
Jean Harlow appeared in her first film as an unbilled extra, earning just $7 a day. After a succession of small parts, Harlow signed a 5-year contract with Hal Roach Studios.
Hal Roach Studios was he was kind of a comedy mastermind who is most famous for kind of Laurel and Hardy, but also did Our Gang. He kind of did quickies and very efficiently. Seeing what Jean Harlow looked like and sort of thinking he could make some good comedy out of her, he cast her in Double Whoopee, which is a Laurel and Hardy film in which the idiot pair work for a very grand hotel. It's kind of doorman.
This is quite significant because she gets quite a lot of screen time. It's not just a walk-on. She gets quite a lot of screen time as a sort of socialite who emerges from a limousine in quite a flimsy outfit, actually. And thanks to Stan Laurel, manages to get the bottom of her dress trapped in the door of the car. So as she walks away, it rips away from her legs. And she walks into the hotel with entire lower half sort of, not naked, but I mean, you know, exposed. So from her very first major appearance, she's presented as a sex symbol, as a very sexy girl.
Certainly gives you a small prelude to maybe how Jean Harlow would be used and considered and valued by Hollywood.
Jean Harlow starred opposite Laurel and Hardy in 2 further films.
In the end, she wanted to get out because, you know, if you're working with Laurel and Hardy, it's Laurel and Hardy everybody wants to see, not you. And so she had little parts that were not very wonderful. And she wanted her contract torn up. And strangely enough, Hal Roach was good enough to tear it up in front of her. said, okay, if you don't want to continue, I don't mind. And he tore her contract up.
Jean Harlow had begun her screen career, but was currently without a contract. In 1930, the actress met film producer and business mogul Howard Hughes.
She came to the attention of the great mogul Howard Hughes because an actor named James Hall spotted some of her work, and he was working with Howard Hughes on Hell's Angels at the time.
Howard Hughes was remaking Hell's Angels, his grand World War I fighter pilot film. He'd made it as a silent film, deciding he now wanted to do it with sound, which was just arriving. And Greta Nielsen, who'd been the lead in the silent one, was Norwegian. And of course, as soon as she came to speak, she had a strange Norwegian accent. So poor old Greta got fired for being Norwegian. And they were looking around for someone to fill that role.
So he kind of did this other actor a favor, called in Jean Harlow for a stage test, and she did a wonderful job, and he was impressed with her. So this was her first really big feature film, Hell's Angels.
Roy!
Helen.
Oh, terribly sorry. Mother's full shopping. I simply flew. My, isn't it hot?
You shouldn't have hurried so.
Oh, but I wanted to. Roy, you've no right to look so cool. I'm broiling. Theo.
Yes, you are, aren't you?
No, not one.
Well, you're so marvelous, I hardly dare.
Oh, silly.
Hell's Angels was a huge hit and did well at the Oscars. And what's interesting, if you look back at the film, she was slammed for her performance. And during the reviews, I think Variety beautifully wrote that nobody's ever star possessing what she's got. In other words, it didn't matter. She just had va-va-voom straight away.
When you look at the film now, it's mostly aerobatics and extraordinary sort of action adventure. But she does stick out as being someone completely unusual.
Roy's frightfully high-minded. He doesn't approve of me.
He wouldn't approve of me either if he knew what I'm really like.
Doesn't he know?
No. When I'm with Roy, I'm the way Roy wants me to be. That's caddish, isn't it? But I can't help it.
I understand.
Roy wouldn't.
Harlow had signed a contract with Hughes during production on Hell's Angels, and he swiftly built on her new stardom and popularity with audiences.
When he took her out on a publicity tour, as Howard Hughes liked to do, and he sent her all around the country to promote the film and to do public appearances, he started to realize that she was popular. She was getting a big reaction. The way she looked and the way she kind of acted, I think, tells you something, that he realized that he could do something with her.
Howard Hughes knew how to publicize his stars. He felt there was something in her that was different, which was absolutely true. He also loved the fact that her hair made her distinctive.
She went on to make a string of films, started to work a lot, including The Public Enemy, in which she comes across extremely well.
Yeah, go screwy.
How are you going?
I want to blow.
You're a spoiled boy, Tommy. You want things and you're not content until you get them. Well, maybe I'm spoiled too. Maybe I feel that way too. But you're not running away from me. Come here.
Public Enemy, again, a big success with the public. They really rated her, but critics weren't so kind. And basically it's all down to her looks. She was this sort of blonde bombshell, the original blonde bombshell. So the critics didn't take her so seriously. They thought she was kind of this vamp.
I think the critics were wrong about her. She was never a great actress, but she had a kind of a freedom and a naturalness which was quite different to the big stars of Hollywood at the time, who were much better trained than she was.
She was just very, very naturally sexy on the screen. It's not like she had to make a big effort. And I think that made her extremely attractive to audiences.
Although Jean Harlow's enigmatic performances were drawing in large audiences, there was some concerned cinema goers.
What's kind of interesting, I think, certainly for her career, the span of it, is that it happened sort of pre-Hays Code coming in properly. And so actually her screen roles are very sexualized and very sort of enticing.
One of the reasons for the Hays Code coming into operation was Jean Harlow. And in many of her films, the censor demanded cuts.
In 1931, Harlow starred in Platinum Blonde, the actress's signature film.
As a special favor to me, you won't print that story, will you? Please?
You know something, lady? If you sold life insurance, I'd go for a policy in 60 seconds.
Oh, thank you. I knew you'd understand.
She was cast in Howard Hughes' 1931 film called Gallagher, but he wanted to capitalize on this starlet he had, so he retitled it Platinum Blonde, because that was her trademark. She sometimes denied that she dyed her hair, but I think it came out later from people who knew her that, yes, she was using bleach, she was using Clorox, she was using soap flakes, ammonia, but she had this one-of-a-kind hairstyle on screen.
She was the Platinum Blonde, and at the height of her fame, there were thousands of American women trying to copy her hairstyle.
Dexter, is there any finishing school we could send him to?
Yes, Sing Sing.
Oh, just the same. He's going to be a different person when I get through with him.
When you get through with it,
Yes, it's going to be a very interesting experiment.
to make a gentleman out of a tramp.
Exactly.
Now, Anne, you'll remember how much it cost to get rid of that baseball player.
You don't seem to understand that this one's different. He has brains.
What about me, Anne?
You? Oh, don't go serious on me, Dexter.
Howard Hughes had an eye for a Hollywood lady, you know. And he had an eye for a product, and I think he saw in the young Jean Harlow almost a brand he could make, almost a kind of a defined idea of something.
Howard Hughes was a master of propaganda and promotion as well as being a filmmaker. And he did the unusual thing of sending her out on tour and creating a kind of competition. $10,000 for anybody who could turn up and who had more or less matched the color of her hair.
$10,000 in 1931 is a huge amount of money. Nobody could do it.
Up until that point, nobody had quite realized how good she was at comedy. She was actually quite a gifted comedienne.
You mean you'd like to have me live here in your house?
Sure, we can have the whole left wing and be all by ourselves all the time.
Oh, we could have the whole left wing. Well, would that be room enough for us?
Oh, darling, of course. If it isn't, there are 6 rooms and 2 baths, but if that isn't enough, Mother will give us the blue room, I think.
Well, Mother would give us the blue room. You haven't a red room, have you? Well, bless her heart. Wouldn't that be nice? Well.
She's presented as a star in that film. She looks every inch a star. They give her the most extraordinarily beautiful gowns and show off her luminous skin. And she rises to the occasion.
At the end of 1931, Hughes loaned Harlow to MGM to star in their gangster film, The Beast of the City. On set, Jean started a romance with an assistant producer on the film, Paul Byrne.
Being loaned out by one studio to another was common practice, and she was loaned out to a local gangster film for MGM. But through that, she met Paul Byrne, who was sort of a second to Irving Thalberg there. He was kind of his assistant. And Byrne clearly fell head over heels for her. The light of Jean Harlow kind of really sort of dazzled him. And he then went to Mayer and sort of said, look, you've got to spend the money. We've got to have this girl on our team. She's got to be part of MGM. And Mayer just went, she's not an MGM girl. You know, she's wrong. He liked more innocent American sweetheart types, which already clearly, you know, she was barely 21, but she clearly wasn't.
At first, they were a little reluctant. They didn't want to deal with Howard Hughes buying out her contract. But he persisted, and by 1932, Irving Thalberg signed this deal that brought her over to MGM, and that was a big boost to her career. It gave her a chance to play some different kind of roles.
Harlow and Byrne married soon after her new contract was signed.
It's rather ironic that the first major film she made for them was called Red-Headed Woman, and it was in fact the first, and probably the only film she made with a red wig, so in fact it covered her legendary platinum blonde looks. It was an absolute classic role for her. She was a homewrecker. She was the ultimate bad girl. It was very, very sexy.
It's quite a lively role for her. And also it's pre-code Hollywood, so she's wearing some provocative outfits, but not just the sex symbol, also quite funny.
I think until Red-Headed Woman, she'd kind of been a supporting role, mainly. You know, there were big hits, but she hadn't yet sort of stepped up and become a star in her own right. And she began with Red-Headed Woman a very fertile period with MGM, where she would become, you know, a succession of films, a big star.
Jean Harlow had signed a new contract with MGM, and her star was on the rise. In 1932, while shooting the film Red Dust, Harlow suffered a personal tragedy.
While Jean Harlow was shooting Red Dust, there was a big scandal that erupted because her husband of only 2 months, Paul Byrne, was found dead in their house in Benedict Canyon with a shot to the head. It's still a mystery today. It was ruled officially a suicide, but there was a very strange note left by the bed, and there's still speculation. Did he kill himself? If he did kill himself, why?
And there's kind of various sort of theories, but I think the reality is that it turned out he did have a common law wife. And I think really, and she was there on the night of his death, confronting Harlow.
People thought maybe Jean Harlow did it, but I think not. My best guess is that he probably did commit suicide.
The common law wife then committed suicide as well. It's quite a tragic story.
He did have a lot of contacts in the underworld as well. There has been a suggestion that he was murdered by some gangster to whom he owed money. It is much more likely that he actually committed suicide. Of course, the publicity machine, the people who protected her went into overdrive.
The studio tried to get in there and make sure there was no scandal. She kept very, very quiet about it.
The scandal sort of rode out in the papers, and they did their best to sort of limit the possible fallout. In the end, it didn't matter because, funnily enough, partly because of the role she'd been playing and partly because she'd already endeared it to the audiences, it just made her more famous. People liked her even more for it.
Jean Harlow just kind of shook it off and stepped away and then carried on working for MGM. But, you know, again, you don't know quite where she was personally.
Well, for the love of mud, where am I sleeping, on a racetrack?
Come on, let's have it. Who are you? Where'd you come from?
Don't rush me, brother. I'm Pollyanna the Glad Girl.
I see. Came up on the boat with him, eh?
I came up on the boat, sure, but not with that. He was in the steerage as far as I was concerned. I thought I'd convince this drunken lug. Get him out of here, will you?
Red Dust turned out to be not just a big box office success, but actually a really good film. It put her in a position where she was sexy and funny, but deeply romantic. I mean, there's a real streak of romance running through this film, but it's also set in a sort of outlandish place in the jungle, so it had exotic locations as well.
Red Dust was a great role for her. This is a film that's now in the U.S. National Film Registry. It really shows some great chemistry between her and Clark Gable.
There, I knew you had a laugh in you. That's perfect. Shake and go to the head of your class. Now, wait a minute, Fred.
Come here.
Hey.
If you look at Red Dust, it's very sexy, and the two of them act very well together, and it's got much more physicality than your average Hollywood film of the time.
What's that? Hey! Hey! How many times have I told you to let down those curtains?
Why? They've all gone off to work.
One of the most famous scenes in this film is she's sort of bathing in this barrel that's exposed to the neighbors, and he's saying, get out of there. But it just looks like she's having fun. It's a nice sparky character as well.
Hey, what's the idea?
What?
Getting in that barrel.
Oh, I don't know. Maybe I'm going over Niagara Falls.
Hey, you're supposed to rinse off with that gourd. Say, listen, do you know we drink that water?
Yeah, well, you won't unless you're stubborn and insist on.
I thought Clark Gable was always very well cast against women. I think to get Clark Gable right, you picked the right kind of woman who sort of drew something out of him. Certainly in terms of the feisty female against the kind of ironic, the calm, stoic male. Kind of very much worked on screen, and I think she kind of brought his swagger to life a bit.
You can see that they just spark off each other in a way that the other stars of the film don't quite manage. They've got something. They've definitely got the chemistry.
After Red Dust's release, Harlow began an affair with boxer Max Baer. When his wife threatened to name Harlow in their divorce proceedings, the studio acted fast to avoid a scandal.
In MGM's controlling of the elements of scandal, and the Byrne suicide scandal had just kind of gone through the system. So MGM, probably wanting to maybe sort of present her in a calmer way, married her off to a cinematographer, and it was just almost like arranged marriage. I was just amazed that the studio could arrange a marriage. Jean Harlow's a remarkable kind of sort of blueprint of studio control, you know, and manipulation. They could rise her up, put her to the side and bring her hair, they could dye her hair, run competitions, and you do wonder where the mind's after a while, because everyone tells you how to think.
Jean Harlow and Harold divorced 8 months later.
It's allowed her to stretch her acting muscles a little beyond the ones that she'd already done in the previous film, which was completely unforced, which was quite rare, of course, because we are only talking a few years after silent movies.
Do you two gentlemen mind if I go ahead with the number?
Let her go.
Pick it up at number 4.
In 1935, MGM cast Jean Harlow in...
David, wake up. You'll be late.
The following year, Harlow starred with a young James Stewart in Wife vs. Secretary.
Oh. What time is it?
2 o'clock.
Oh. I was going home at 12.
I didn't think you'd be waiting. We didn't finish work until 11, and I couldn't have got to the theater on time.
Yeah, that's all right.
In 1936's Wife vs. Secretary, ironically, it's actually a more wholesome role for her, but things got a little less wholesome on the set.
There's an incredibly funny story about James Stewart in which they have a long kiss in a car, and he kept messing it up, and they had to do several retakes.
He said later that he kept botching it because he wanted to keep kissing her. They kissed at least 12 times, 12 takes of this scene, and he later said that he realized he had never been kissed until he had been kissed by Jean Harlow.
Jean Harlow had become one of MGM's most popular and profitable stars.
It was a very bad time for the studios in the late 30s, there was no doubt about that. And Jean Harlow was one of the few people who really kept MGM going, because she had success after success, even though the critics didn't much care for her performances sometimes. There was something about her that the public adored.
If it hadn't been for her, MGM might well have gone bankrupt. But because of her popularity and because she was still huge box office, it didn't matter that, you know, other studios were going down the tubes. MGM could keep going simply due to her name and her presence in films.
Mayer had not wanted her because he felt she was wrong for MGM, but I think she really did click. She was melodramatic, but she made these quite sort of daring relationship films, and she was kind of funny and exciting without having to be brazenly a comedienne, and she did keep MGM going.
Anything, mademoiselle?
Harlow had another hit when she starred in the title role in Susie.
Ingenuity.
Yes, mademoiselle.
You know something, Barman?
No, mademoiselle.
Frenchmen are not the romantic fellows I thought they were.
Yes, mademoiselle.
I'm told that they have to toss a coin to find out whether or not they'll dance with the girl. They can't decide things like that with their own heads.
Ah, but in America, Barman, did you know in America when you want ham and eggs or hotcakes or a baby, you simply go to a store and put a nickel into a slot machine. Did you know that, Barman?
Yes, monsieur. Oh, did you hear what the gentleman said, mademoiselle?
Barman, you're having hallucinations. There isn't a gentleman in sight.
Oh, no, mademoiselle.
For her film Susie, she received top billing over Cary Grant, who was already a star. So it just shows you the level at which she had reached at the relatively young age. She was only in her 20s.
It's quite a decent wartime thriller. It's about German spies. She draws a lot out of her leading man, out of Cary Grant, and he's one of those slightly kind of ironic presences that need a life force opposite him.
Home! An American custom, I believe.
I'm not a bride. I haven't been one for a whole week.
You'll always be a bride.
I'm just an old married woman.
Quiet. Wives in France are not allowed to contradict their husband.
Then we'll take a trip to America. Hey, bring those things in. Something tells me we live here. Andre, put me down. People will think we're both crazy.
Oh, I hope we stay that way. Albert! Albert, this is Madame Charville.
Put me down.
In the hallway, John.
It's not a film that's very well remembered now, but I think the very fact that she was considered that much of a draw tells you everything you need to know about her position in Hollywood and at MGM at that time.
Again, everybody noticed her. And I know that in those days, those screwball comedies were very good. They knew exactly how to make them. Even so, it was Jean Harlow who made that film a big success as much as anybody else in the cast.
Although she lit up the screen, Jean Harlow still struggled with poor health, which was increasingly deteriorating. In 1937, she starred in the comedy Personal Property.
Haven't we met somewhere before?
No, we have not.
Very foolish of us, wasn't it?
That is a matter of opinion.
Your face seems strangely familiar to me.
So do your manners.
By the time she came to her making her last films, she really was ill. Sometimes they had to stop the shoot for a few days because of that. And she was getting fatter, puffy in the face, and was quite clearly not right.
Her final completed picture was Personal Property, opposite Robert Taylor. The shift in her performance is subtle but noticeable. She plays another socialite, we think, a very, very rich lady, we think, at the beginning. In fact, she turns out to be completely broke. But it's a softer film, it's a romantic film. It allows her to be really vulnerable. It's actually rather a lovely film.
Trees,
And the bees,
the breeze,
the birds.
the herds. Your move.
Oh, if this could just go on forever.
I'm afraid Clara would sweep us up.
Oh, now you've ruined it.
Well, all good things have to come to an end, you know that.
Is that original?
No, but it's true, fortunately.
You think this is just the beginning of something. This is just a career that's sort of getting into full froth, you know, full spade. And the health issues then would very sadly take over.
Jean Harlow's health continued to fail, and she began to find promotional activities difficult.
In 1937, she traveled to Washington to take part in Franklin D. Roosevelt's fundraising March of Dimes. It was physically taxing for her. I mean, not just the traveling, but the actual event itself. She contracted influenza during the course of that time and had to be taken care of. William Powell left a film set in order to be able to be with her. He was very concerned about her health. He had been for some time. She was, in fact, due to start shooting a new film, Saratoga, which was delayed until she actually became fit.
There's one scene where she's playing a character that's supposed to have a fever, and they said she looked too bad to shoot this scene. She was so feverish looking. But, you know, she's a 26-year-old young woman. Everybody thinks, oh, she'll be fine. But it gets worse and worse. They take her to the hospital finally. It emerges her kidneys are failing. And just a shock to everybody around her. You know, especially her boyfriend, William Powell, is in the hospital with her thinking, oh, she's going to get better.
At that time, 1937, there was no real cure. There was nothing they could do about it. The treatments were fairly primitive. And she died at the extraordinarily early age of 26.
You almost can't imagine the shock when one of Hollywood's biggest stars dies at age 26, very suddenly.
James Stewart said it's like every studio went quiet when the news came out, and there was like sort of a minute's silence.
When she died, it was an enormous funeral. Everybody from Hollywood went. William Powell, who really did love her, was absolutely distraught.
MGM Studios did the unprecedented thing of closing the studio for the day.
MGM arranges for this beautiful tombstone to say, "Our baby," because that was her nickname, had been since she was a little girl, the baby. And, you know, sad she was almost still a baby when she died.
Due to public demand, MGM finished production on Saratoga, and the film was released less than 2 months after her death.
For your information, I'm marrying Hartley Madison because I love him.
Carol, this is Duke. You can level with me, honey.
I don't know what you're talking about.
Don't try to pretend to me that Frank Creighton's daughter has fallen for a Wall Street chump.
A Wall Street chump? Where would you racetrack people be if it went for the word chump? You would win any argument. Call someone a chump and it proves you're his superior. You, a fly-by-night bookmaker, calling a member of one of the most important families in America a chump. A man who could buy and sell 20 petty gamblers like you with his small change.
I suppose you'd marry him if he didn't have a quarter.
I prefer him that way. Now open that door.
MGM had planned to continue Saratoga, but by replacing Jean Harlow with another actress after her death. There was such public outcry that people wanted to see Jean Harlow's last film that she had been making, so they used it with 2 or more body doubles, some in different close-range shots, some in long range, some overdubbing.
This has become, of course, a great film buff's game, is to spot the scenes in which Harlow is really there and the ones which are the doubles. Actually, it's not hard at all, because the devices they use were fairly primitive. They have girls dressed like her at the racetrack, holding binoculars up to their eyes. There's a scene where she never turns to the camera. She's shot from behind. All these are doubles. But the film was completed, and what do you know? It was a huge success.
It was another great success for her, even though she wasn't there anymore.
It was a huge box office success. It was MGM's second highest grossing film of that year.
I want to be free. I want to be gay and have fun. Life's short, and I want to live while I'm alive.
It's amazing to think that Jean Harlow was only 26 when she died, because she had made such a huge impact in Hollywood. She made 36 films in just 10 years, and some great films. I would have loved to see what she would have done in her 40s and 50s with some different material.
If she'd carried on, I think maybe we would regard her in the same terms as we do Monroe. We missed out on maybe a different kind of Jean Harlow.
She had natural gifts. And I think that as she was allowed to make films, she just got better and better. She could train herself.
A lot of feminists now think that she was one of the first really feminist film stars. She had more freedom on the screen. She was absolutely clear-headed in the fact that she was just going to be herself in the films.
A woman that had a more varied career and could have had an even longer career with more varied roles in future had she not tragically died so young.
Paul Walker's family and friends paid tribute to a man who liked to go fast on the ride of his life, although what he really wanted was to be a park ranger. The heartwarming I Am Paul Walker is new tomorrow at 9 on Sky Arts.